Our second speaker is Jehad Abusalim. Born to Palestinian refugee parents in Morocco and raised in Gaza, to where his parents returned during the Oslo process, Jehad is now a PhD student in history and Hebrew and Judaic studies at NYU. He's worked closely with PalThink for Strategic Studies, the Hadaf Center for Human Rights, and the Palestinian Center for Democracy and Conflict Resolution. Jehad was present in Gaza during Israel's previous massacres in that place in 2008 and 2009 and in 2012.
So, thank you, Students for Justice in Palestine, for organizing this event. Thanks all for coming and being with us here tonight. Of course, Gaza is an important part, a significant part of the entire question of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and the entire discussions that surround it. Actually, Joe covered most of the context, the stuff that one needs to talk about, before discussing any issue related to Gaza. To avoid repeating the stuff Joe said and to get to my point, I just want to refer to a number of issues. But also, for me, in order to get to the points that I want to talk about, I will give a brief context. I hope this is not going to be boring, but it's going to serve the purpose of my talk. So these two maps are really important to look at while talking about Gaza's current reality. These two maps are really important for many reasons. First, if we look at this map, we can see here the administrative divisions. So if we look at this map, we can see the administrative divisions of Palestine under the British Mandate and before under the Ottoman Empire. These administrative divisions of historical Palestine have been there for hundreds of years, and within these, within the landscape, within the space of each of these divisions, people lived in villages that surround central cities. So if we look at the Gaza region here, the Gaza district, which was an administrative unit, as I said, under the British when Palestine was under British Mandate, and before under the Ottoman Empire, we can see that the area of Gaza region compared to the what became the Gaza Strip after 1948 is really, there is a huge difference. So the Gaza region, the Gaza district, and the pre-48 Gaza district was around 430 square miles. If we look at the Gaza Strip that was born after the Nakba, we look at an area of 150 miles. Why is this important? The Gaza, the sub-district before 48, included around 53 towns and villages, with Gaza City as their center. If we look at the arrows that refer to the paths that Palestinian refugees followed during the Nakba, we can see that a huge chunk of Palestinian refugees, 200,000 of the 750,000, were all concentrated in what became the Gaza Strip. This is important to understand what is going on since that period until now. And to relate to that and to refer to Moshe Dayan's quote that you brought up from 1956. So after this line, the armistice line, which was drawn after the armistice agreement was signed between Israel and the Arab states, which, according to the armistice agreement, doesn't entail any, doesn't mean, it's not a political border. It's not a border that is going to decide the nature of the border between this area and Israel. After the Nakba, we ended up in a situation where 200,000 Palestinian refugees moved to what became the Gaza Strip, and these refugees now are living with around 90,000 people who are native to the Gaza, to the parts that weren't occupied. So in the early 1950s, some of these refugees who are in refugee camps in this really small area started to cross the demarcation line, which wasn't in the form of a fence at the time. It didn't take the shape of a clear barrier. It was just a bunch of signs scattered around the demarcation line here that tells people that you can't cross. This is an armistice agreement line. You can't really cross to the other side of the border. But there were shepherds, there were villagers, there were peasants who even could cite their villages on the other side of the border. So around this area there were villages that people could see from within the Gaza Strip itself. So people would start crossing the border to harvest their crops, to meet people who remained at the other side of the border, to do many things, just go back to the village and grab stuff from their houses and return again to the refugee camp. Some of them were arrested, and this made the Gaza border at the time a frontier of confrontation. The Israeli kibbutzim and the Israeli military outposts around this fence started to shoot at them, at these people who were crossing to their towns and villages, just to return to what they consider as their territory, as their land, as their place. And then until the mid-50s, around the mid-50s, the Israeli government started calling the attempts of people to return to their towns and villages as infiltration, and they called the very simple act of going back to your house to grab your stuff as sabotage, theft, and robbery. So this made the Gaza border one of the early places where confrontations started to happen after the Nakba. Now, imagine yourself a refugee living in the Gaza Strip. Now, after 65 years of that, you are still a refugee. You live there. You can see some villages, as I said before, can be seen from across the border. Now, it's 1967. The military occupation after that followed the 6 Days War began. It wasn't only enough for Israel to prevent these people from returning to their land, as Joe explained in his presentation. But the settlement of Gaza has also to do with Gaza's current reality. 1/3 of Gaza's most fertile lands, that includes most of Gaza's fresh water, were stolen as part of the settlement process that Israel started in 1967. Until 2005, 8,000 settlers were living in the Gaza Strip, in the blue areas that we can see here, dividing the Gaza Strip, preventing even any kind of normal population expansion within this closed and fenced and tiny area. So from 1967 until 2005, until the Israeli settlers left Gaza, you can imagine how difficult the situation was. Relatively similar to the situation in the West Bank. I used to live in my city is Deir al-Balah, and I used to go to school to school in Gaza before the second Intifada. And when the second Intifada started, there was a checkpoint around this area that separates the middle area from Gaza and prevents people from moving normally. And at the time, we had to leave the cars around this area and then move on the beach, and then go take a cab or a taxi from the other side. This was the reality until 2005. This fence now is the fence that separates the Gaza Strip from Israel.
As you can see, of course, some of the refugees, when and their descendants, when they pass by this area, they can easily locate the places of their villages and towns. Why is this important? This is important for many reasons. When people now, I mean, when Gaza is talked about in most of times, Gaza is being unfortunately taken out of context. This is a place where history matters when it comes to talking about the Gaza Strip. We cannot detach the situation now from its historical context, and this is really important. And Joe really did a very great job introducing the context that created what is now the Gaza Strip. Before 48, there was nothing such a Gaza Strip. There was a Gaza district like any other district in historic Palestine, where people lived normally. And the Nakba for them, the 1948 war, was a disruption, was a rupture of their social, political, economic life. That's why we have to be more aware of how Gaza tells us about the complexity of the refugee question. We cannot really just refer to the situation as just action and reaction. This is what Israel wants. Since the early 50s, what the Palestinians did, what the Palestinian refugees in the Gaza Strip did as just simply an attempt to return to their homeland, to return to their villages and towns, was labeled as infiltration. Infiltration where people were stealing their stuff from their houses. So after 65 years, we cannot just deal with Gaza as a place where a bunch of angry people. This is how Gaza, unfortunately, is portrayed now, just a place of a bunch of angry people who just want to hit Israel and throw rockets at it. This is out of context. This takes the situation out of context and leave us in a place where we cannot really understand how the Nakba created this situation. I'm not going to talk history. This takes a lot of time. As for and this is the topic of tonight's event, the 2014 operation. I lived the Castled, the 2008-2009 operation. I lived the 2012. And my father experienced the 6 Days War and he lived 7 years in Lebanon during the Civil War. My grandmother lived the 1948 Nakba. She lived the 1956 war, in which Gaza was invaded at the time. She lived the 1967 war. She lived the 1973. She then moved to Lebanon. She lived the 1978 invasion, the 1982 invasion of Lebanon. Then she moved back to Palestine, and she lived the first Intifada, the second Intifada, Castled. They said that this time was completely different. Was completely different in terms of everything: its scale, the intensity of firepower, the amount of explosions and TNT that were dropped on over the heads of people in the Gaza Strip. As we can see in this map, it shows the red points show the destroyed buildings that were targeted during the operation. So you can imagine how difficult the situation was. I was on the phone with my family. I spent the summer. I was here. I wasn't there at the time. You just call your family to check that they are alive. Imagine you do this for 53 days. 53 days of hell that at their end, I was talking to my father, who was telling me that he wishes to die because it has been really difficult. My family split into two halves at the later stages of the operation because of the random bombing that was taking place all over My family lived in Deir al-Balah, which is here. From the rooftop of my house, you can easily see the border with Israel and the beach of the Mediterranean Sea. So it tells you how small, how tiny the place is. So imagine that you have artillery shelling coming from the border area, destroying everything around the Gaza Strip, and there is no place for people to go to. There is no place for people to hide, or no shelters to protect themselves. 3 of my best friends were killed. One was killed while taking a nap in his house. His house is by the shore. The Israeli military ships just bombed the house, and he was killed. There is no context to his death. There was no, he wasn't a Hamas member. He didn't carry arms. He did nothing. The guy was just taking a nap in his place. The other friend was standing outside his house. They bombed another house in his area, and some part of the rocket just killed him. The third guy, who's from Ash-Shija'iyya, which witnessed the hardest massacre, he was shot in the back while escaping the ground invasion. So we can imagine how the situation was, and it's how difficult for the people there. And this again brings the question of why. Why is Israel doing that? What's the point? What's the logic? Is it just, is this going to give Israel security and achieve what they want? And I have no answer to that question. And I just want people to think about it. Think about the logic behind this continuing attempt to silence Gaza since 1948. Gaza paid the heaviest price of the Nakba by absorbing this huge number of refugees, and in a place that barely has resources to let these people really live a life of dignity there. Gaza, and as I mentioned before, despite that, in addition to forcing this tiny place to absorb this huge number of refugees, Israel also brought its settlers there, exploiting more resources, exploiting the fresh water. When they left, they didn't leave anything back in the place. They consumed all the fresh water that they were exploiting in the settlements. They left nothing behind. And then people wonder, why is Gaza throwing some rockets from time to time? I mean, I see, I'm not here, I'm not giving legitimacy to anything, but let's see these rockets, let's see Gaza's anger as an attempt to tell the world that, look at us, look at how horrible the situation is. Look at the price that this place has been paying since the Nakba. Look at the population density. Look at the refugee camps. Gaza, from time to time, its anger in the form of rockets, in the form of fighting with bare hands in the first Intifada, because the first Intifada started there and people fought with their bare hands. These attempts to tell these are just simply attempts by people in the Gaza Strip to tell the Israelis, to tell the world that, look at how intense, how difficult, how serious the situation is here. And instead of managing the occupation, instead of inventing ways to make this, to preserve the status quo, let's find a solution to the problem. And for the refugees in Gaza, for example, these people have no other place to go to. They want to return to their homeland. Because Gaza is not capable anymore of absorbing people. And this brings us also to the political question. And people would say, okay, but why are the Palestinians, why is Hamas, for example, taking the violent path? Well, look at the West Bank. Our guy in the West Bank, Mahmoud Abbas, who's pursuing the peace track since mid-90s. He and his PLO, look at what he's been getting from the Israelis. He's committed to the peace process, and he's policing the West Bank. There is no single bullet coming out of it. But in return, he's just getting more settlement, and he's getting more checkpoints, and the West Bank is being taken from us. More and more settlers are being planted there. So Hamas would argue, well, look, this guy who is following the peace, who's on the peace track, has been getting nothing, and we're not going to be part of this joke. And this is one of Hamas' arguments when it comes to questioning why are they seeking this violent resistance, armed struggle path. So, in order not to get the 2014 aggression on Gaza repeated, I believe that more pressure has to be put on this lunatic state that has been only doing warmongering around the region. And finally, we saw Benjamin Netanyahu in the Congress trying to market a new war. He's fond of wars. He loves them. He was talking about the Persian Bazaar and the Game of Thrones and all these things. And he wants a new war. He wants a new war on Iran, and that would bring the region into more collapse. And for him, Gaza is a laboratory. The past 10 years I lived there, you wouldn't be able to watch TV like for 30 minutes, for like continuing 30 minutes, because the drone is 24/7 over your head, and the drone disrupts the signal. You wouldn't be able to when there is military operations like the one like Castled or the one in 2012 and the very recent one. People really feel that they have been treated as a test field for Israel's weaponry. And there is a documentary that is really worth watching. It's called The Lab. It's directed by an Israeli director. And in this documentary, the journalist interviews the defense minister at the time, the Israeli defense minister at the time, Benjamin Ben Eliezer, and he asks him, why is there demand on Israeli weaponry? So the Israeli defense minister simply answers, because they are tested. Gaza is not a laboratory for Israel. Gaza is a place that deserves to live. Gaza is a place that has been suffering for decades and paid the heaviest price of the occupation. And again, not to repeat the things that I've been saying, we have now, Gaza now is on the verge of collapse, if it is not collapsing already. 80% unemployment, 80% of children have nutrition problems. People have electricity for 4 to 6 hours a day, and without electricity you can't pump water. So, and the construction hasn't really started yet. People are still homeless from the previous aggression and from the aggression before. So the situation is taking us, unfortunately, I think, to a new round, and apparently Israel is not really concerned, is not really interested in not resuming the cycle of violence, because Israel is trying its best to breed the situation to produce more conflict and clashes. And here we should again ask the question, why? What's the point of this whole thing? What's the point of a state surrounded by walls and drones and cameras? What's really wrong? Are they really serious about finding a solution to this conflict, ending it or not? And yet they accuse us of being the party who's not interested in that. This was all. I hope I shared, although it's not easy to talk about it, especially this very recent operation, since for me it reminds of really of losing those who are really close and beloved to me, my friends, and just brings these really hard moments of thinking about your family's life and safety. I hope it's not going to be repeated, but if it is going to be repeated, and if the state insists on pursuing these very same policies and acts, there has to be more pressure put on them. And it really begins from here. Thank you.